4 seconds. That is exactly how long the footage lasted before the screen went dark. 4 seconds of a figure standing motionless at the threshold of a home belonging to an 84-year-old woman. A mask covering every inch of the face. A posture that communicated something far more chilling than aggression. It communicated patience. This person had been there before. They knew exactly where to stand. They knew exactly what they were doing. And then, in a single deliberate movement, they reached up and tore the camera from the wall. The feed cut. The recording stopped. And whoever was standing on that porch in the darkness of a cold Arizona night believed, with absolute certainty, that they had just erased the most dangerous evidence against them. They were wrong in a way that will likely define the rest of their life. Because what that individual did not know, what they could not have anticipated despite all of their careful planning, all of their reconnaissance, all of their meticulous preparation, was that the Federal Bureau of Investigation had already cataloged 6 separate surveillance systems capturing their movements across the surrounding neighborhood. 6 cameras, 6 angles, 6 independent streams of evidence documenting a pattern of behavior that stretched back 21 days before Nancy Guthrie vanished from her home in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona. The suspect tore one camera off a wall and thought they had won. What they actually did was commit the single most consequential mistake of the entire operation. This is the Crime Files. No sensationalism, no exploitation, just evidence. Just analysis, just the pursuit of truth. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She was last seen at her residence in the Catalina foothills neighborhood of Tucson on the night of January 31st, 2026. She lives alone. She has significant mobility limitations that make unassisted travel of any meaningful distance essentially impossible without help. She was not found wandering. She was not discovered disoriented at a nearby location. She was gone, completely and without explanation, in the hours of the night, wearing only pajamas, without her shoes, without her phone, without the heart medication her cardiologist had prescribed to regulate the functioning of her pacemaker. The following morning, February 1st, a family member arrived at the residence and immediately recognized that something was catastrophically wrong. Multiple exterior doors at the rear of the property had been left propped open. The Ring doorbell camera had been violently detached from the wall beside the front entrance. There was blood visible on the front doorstep, and Nancy was nowhere inside the home. The call went out. Within hours, the Pima County Sheriff's Department had activated a full missing persons response. Within a day, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had joined the effort. A task force comprising more than 20 investigators began operating around the clock. Search teams moved through miles of Sonoran desert terrain. Dive units examined bodies of water. Canine teams worked through the landscape surrounding the Catalina foothills. Aerial units scanned the region from above. Nothing. Nancy Guthrie is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show. The visibility that came with that connection transformed this case into a matter of national attention within 48 hours. News networks broadcast it continuously. Social media amplified it to tens of millions of people. Billboards appeared across Tucson and the surrounding region. But visibility, while valuable, was not what investigators needed most. What they needed was evidence. And evidence, it turned out, had been accumulating for weeks without anyone realizing it. On February 10th, 9 days after Nancy disappeared, the FBI made a strategic decision. They released a still image captured by the Ring doorbell camera at the front entrance of the residence. The image showed the masked figure clearly, or at least as clearly as the camera's resolution allowed. Dark clothing. A mask concealing the face entirely, a posture that suggested familiarity with the property and with the act of standing precisely where they were standing. The image spread immediately. Every major news platform published it. Every true crime discussion forum analyzed it. Hundreds of tips flooded into the FBI tip line within the first 72 hours of the image being made public. But while the public was examining that image and speculating about the identity of the person in it, FBI analysts were doing something far more methodical. They were examining the metadata embedded in the footage itself, the timestamps, the encoding data, the transmission records from the Ring system's cloud servers. And what they found altered the entire trajectory of the investigation. The image that had been released, the one that the public assumed had been captured on the night of the abduction, January 31st, may not have been from that night at all. According to a statement from Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos, investigators came to believe that the Ring camera footage showing the masked figure was most likely recorded on an earlier date, potentially in mid-January, potentially as many as 2 to 3 weeks before Nancy disappeared. Sheriff Nanos would not disclose the specific technical evidence that led investigators to this conclusion. He would not explain exactly what within the metadata or the surrounding footage analysis produced this determination, but he did confirm something that fundamentally changed what investigators understood about who they were dealing with. He confirmed that law enforcement was specifically seeking surveillance footage from the surrounding neighborhood for 2 dates, January 11th and January 24th, 3 weeks before the abduction. And then, again, 1 week before. 2 reconnaissance visits, documented, confirmed, deliberate. This is not the behavior of someone who woke up one morning and made an impulsive decision. This is the behavior of someone executing a plan built on preparation, a plan built on observation, a plan built on the kind of operational discipline that most people associate with military operations or professional intelligence work, not with street-level crime. What the suspect did across those 3 weeks follows a methodology that law enforcement and military analysts recognize immediately. You do not approach a target on the night of an operation without having already studied that target extensively. You observe from a distance first. You identify the rhythms of the household. When does the resident wake up? When do lights turn on? When do they turn off? When do vehicles come and go? When does the mail arrive? When do service workers appear? Which doors are used regularly? Which entrances receive less attention? Where are the cameras positioned? What are the sight lines? Which neighboring properties have dogs? Which streets carry traffic in the late evening? Which ones go quiet by 10 o'clock? You gather all of that information on the first visit. You process it. You identify gaps in your knowledge. You form questions. Then you go back. On the second visit, you verify. You check whether anything has changed. You confirm the details you observed the first time. You identify anything you missed. You test assumptions. And then, when you are satisfied that your operational picture is complete and accurate, you execute. That is what happened in the Catalina foothills across January 2026, and none of it was invisible. Let's talk about the cameras. Not just the Ring doorbell that was torn from the wall. All 6 of them. And I want you to understand something before we go through each one. The suspect visited this neighborhood at least twice before the night of the abduction. They walked those streets. They drove past that house. They studied it. And every single time they did, at least one of these cameras had eyes on them without them ever knowing it. Camera 1 is the Ring doorbell at the front entrance of Nancy's residence. This is the camera everyone knows about. It captured the image released to the public. It is the camera the suspect grabbed with both hands and ripped from the wall. And here is why that act of destruction was so catastrophically pointless. Ring doorbell cameras do not store footage on the device. The moment that camera captures an image, that footage is transmitted in real time over the home's wireless network to Amazon's cloud servers. The camera is a transmission terminal. It captures and broadcasts simultaneously. Destroying the physical unit destroys nothing that has already been sent. The footage was already sitting on servers in a data center somewhere far outside the reach of anyone standing on a porch in Tucson, Arizona. Tearing that camera off the wall did not erase evidence. It confirmed it existed. And it told investigators exactly what kind of person they were dealing with. Camera 2 was mounted on the wooden fence at the rear of the property, angled toward the back of the home, monitoring the rear entrance and the back patio, not immediately visible from the street, not obvious to someone approaching from the front. Investigators became acutely interested in this camera the moment family members reported that multiple rear doors had been found propped open the morning Nancy disappeared. If the suspect used those back doors at any point, if they entered through the rear or staged their exit that way, Camera 2 may have documented every second of it. Camera 3 monitored the driveway and the approach to the garage. According to law enforcement sources speaking with journalists covering this case, this camera had been recording continuously for months. And when investigators began reviewing footage from the specific dates under scrutiny, they found anomalies. Vehicles that did not belong. Cars moving slowly past the property, repeating the pass more than once within a single evening. And some of those vehicles appeared on more than one date. Stop and think about what that means. The same car, identified by color, by body style, by the way it moved through the frame, showing up during the first reconnaissance visit, then reappearing during the second. That is not coincidence. That is a pattern. And that same pattern is about to show up again on Camera 5 in a way that changes everything. Camera 4 belongs to a neighbor residing 2 properties down from Nancy's home. Another Ring doorbell, wide enough in its field of view to capture a segment of the street. On at least one evening in January, this camera recorded a figure moving along the sidewalk at a measured pace, oriented toward Nancy's property. The timestamp places that recording during one of the confirmed reconnaissance dates. The image quality may not be sufficient to support facial recognition, but it documents something equally important. Presence. The suspect was there. They were observed. And now, there is a record proving it. Camera 5 is where this case shifts from suspicious to documented, a traffic monitoring system installed at an intersection approximately 3 blocks from Nancy's residence. These cameras exist to enforce signal violations and collect flow data. They are not designed to solve kidnapping cases, but they record continuously, and they capture every vehicle passing through their field of view with reliable timestamp accuracy. When FBI agents pulled footage from this system for the dates under investigation, they found the same dark-colored sedan that appeared on camera 3. Not once, not twice, 6 separate times over a 3-week period, each appearance in a similar late-evening window, each time traveling in the direction of Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood. The same vehicle that drove slowly past her house on camera 3 was also being recorded 3 blocks away by a traffic camera the suspect almost certainly did not know existed. 6 visits, 6 timestamps. If investigators can connect that license plate to a registered owner, this investigation moves from complex to conclusive. Camera 6 is mounted on the exterior of a commercial building approximately 2 blocks from the residence. The business installed it to monitor their parking area, but the camera's angle extends beyond the lot itself, capturing a section of the adjacent street. According to sources familiar with the investigation, this camera may have recorded a vehicle departing the area during the early morning hours of February 1st, the window of time during which Nancy was taken. Forensic video analysts are working to enhance that footage right now. If they can produce a clear image of the license plate or establish the vehicle's make and model with certainty, that footage becomes a direct link between the crime and whoever committed it. 6 cameras, 1 suspect, 1 camera the suspect knew about, 5 they never considered, and the FBI has every frame. Now let's talk about Cameron Guthrie, because his involvement in the early hours of this investigation reveals something important about how quickly the family understood what they were dealing with. Cameron Guthrie is Savannah's brother. He is also a trained military intelligence officer and fighter pilot, a background that involves at its core the professional recognition of patterns and the rapid assessment of threat environments. When Savannah reached him by phone on the morning of February 1st, distressed and trying to make sense of the scene described to her, Cameron did not need extensive deliberation. He processed the information like an intelligence briefing. Back doors propped open, ring camera torn from the wall, blood on the front doorstep, no phone, no medication, no shoes, pajamas only. His assessment was immediate. He told his sister he believed their mother had been kidnapped for ransom. Savannah was startled by how quickly he arrived at that conclusion, but Cameron had recognized something in the details that trained analysts learned to see. The disabled camera indicated security awareness on the part of the perpetrator. The propped doors indicated a deliberate entry or exit plan. The complete absence of any personal belongings indicated a forcible removal with no time for the victim to gather anything, and the apparent lack of disturbance throughout the rest of the home indicated that whoever entered had a specific objective. They were not there to burglarize the property. They were there for Nancy. Cameron's assessment was correct. Within days, ransom demands began arriving. Multiple notes reached various media organizations, but as Savannah disclosed in a subsequent interview, most of those notes were fabrications, cruel attempts by opportunists to insert themselves into a family's agony for reasons investigators are still working to understand. The family was able to identify these fraudulent communications because they lacked specificity. They contained no verifiable details, no information that could only be known by someone who had been on the property or who had access to inside knowledge of Nancy's circumstances. 2 notes were different. 2 notes contained information that investigators and the family recognized as authentic. Details about the interior of Nancy's home. Details about the exterior of the property. Information that would only be accessible to someone who had spent time studying the residence. Someone who had conducted the kind of sustained reconnaissance that the surveillance footage now documents. The contents of those 2 notes remain confidential. Law enforcement and the family have declined to specify exactly what information they contained, a decision made deliberately to protect the integrity of the investigation and to preserve the evidentiary value of those details. But their existence is significant because it confirms what Cameron had already intuited on the first morning. This was not random. This was not opportunistic. Someone had chosen Nancy Guthrie specifically and had done their homework before they ever appeared on that ring camera for 4 seconds. Now let's talk about the construction angle, because this has become one of the most active lines of inquiry in the entire investigation. Investigative reporting confirmed that federal agents returned to the Catalina Foothills neighborhood on multiple separate occasions in the weeks following Nancy's disappearance, conducting focused interviews with residents about construction activity in the area during January. The questions they asked were not broad. They were precise. Which properties had active construction projects? Which companies held the contracts? Who were the individual workers? What vehicles did they drive? What hours were they on site? And critically, were any workers observed in the neighborhood outside of normal working hours? According to sources familiar with the investigation, agents returned to that neighborhood at least 3 times specifically to pursue this line of inquiry. 3 separate visits focused on construction. That level of repetition does not happen without a reason. The FBI has something in the evidence pointing in this direction. They are not speculating. They are looking for a specific person or vehicle that connects to construction activity in that neighborhood during the surveillance period. The tactical logic is straightforward. The Catalina foothills is an affluent residential area. On any given weekday, there are multiple crews working renovations and new builds throughout the neighborhood. Contractors, landscaping teams, pool maintenance workers, delivery drivers for materials. These workers have a legitimate reason to be present. Their vehicles are expected. Their movement through the neighborhood raises no concern. A person sitting in a work truck near an active job site for several hours is invisible. A person walking down a residential street carrying tools is invisible. And if you needed to conduct sustained surveillance on a specific residence without triggering a single phone call to the police, positioning yourself as someone connected to construction work in the area would be close to perfect cover. The FBI is now cross-referencing employee rosters, subcontractor records, and vehicle registration data against the surveillance footage from all 6 cameras. The question they are trying to answer is direct. Does any person connected to construction activity in the Catalina foothills during January also appear on camera near Nancy's home during evening or nighttime hours when no work was taking place? If the answer is yes, that person is already at the top of a very short list. Separately, investigators have been asking neighbors about a vacant property located near Nancy's residence, a home that was apparently unoccupied in the weeks leading up to the abduction. The FBI wants to know who had access to that property, whether anyone was observed entering or leaving, whether vehicles were parked there at unusual hours. A vacant property represents significant tactical value in a surveillance operation. It provides a staging point where a vehicle can be left without generating questions. It offers a vantage position from which a target can be observed at a distance. It is a location where equipment can be stored, clothing can be changed before and after an operation, and where an individual can wait without any of the exposure that comes with sitting in a parked vehicle on a public street. And it is a location where physical evidence accumulates. Tire tracks in soil, footprints near entryways, biological material left by someone who spent time there. Cell phone tower data that can place a specific device at that location repeatedly over a defined period. Real estate and property records are being examined. Anyone with a legitimate reason to access that property is being interviewed, and the possibility that it served as a base of operations is being treated as a serious line of inquiry. Now let's discuss the DNA evidence, because this may ultimately be the element that makes everything else irrelevant. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed publicly that DNA samples collected from the interior of Nancy's home are being processed by 2 separate forensic laboratories. That detail is not procedurally routine. When law enforcement sends evidence to multiple labs simultaneously, it typically reflects one of 2 circumstances. Either the sample itself is degraded or contaminated in a way that requires specialized analytical technique to produce a usable profile, or it is a mixed sample containing genetic material from more than one individual, requiring the separate identification and isolation of each contributor. Mixed DNA analysis is among the more technically demanding tasks in forensic science. You must first determine how many contributors are present in the sample. Then you must construct a profile for each contributor. Then you must compare those profiles against the known genetic signatures of individuals who had legitimate access to the residence: family members, frequent visitors, service workers, healthcare providers, anyone whose DNA might reasonably appear in the home independent of the crime. The contributor profiles that do not match any person with a legitimate reason to be there become the profiles of interest. The involvement of a second laboratory raises the possibility that investigators are pursuing genetic genealogy analysis. This methodology was used to identify the perpetrator of a series of crimes in California that had remained unsolved for more than 40 years. It works by uploading an unknown DNA profile to genealogical databases that contain profiles voluntarily submitted by members of the public for ancestry research. The system does not look for exact matches. It looks for partial matches, shared genetic segments that indicate a common ancestor, third cousins, fourth cousins, people who share a great-great-grandparent with the unknown individual, but who otherwise have no connection to the crime. When partial matches are found, forensic genealogists begin constructing family trees, working forward through generations, identifying living descendants, eliminating branches, narrowing the field, until the list of candidates becomes small enough for traditional investigative work to take over. surveillance, discarded DNA collection from objects abandoned in public, confirmatory analysis. When a match is confirmed, the evidence is scientifically unambiguous. C.C. Moore, one of the most accomplished practitioners of forensic genealogy working today, with more than 200 cold case identifications to her record, stated in a recent interview that modern DNA analysis has achieved a level of sensitivity that would have seemed impossible a decade ago. The technology is capable of producing viable genetic profiles from trace biological material, a microscopic fragment of skin, a single hair without a root, a nearly invisible deposit of sweat. If the individual who entered Nancy's home left any biological trace at all, and the near-universal consensus among forensic scientists is that it is essentially impossible to move through a confined interior space without leaving some biological evidence, that material is now being processed. The challenge is time. Genetic genealogy is not rapid. Initial profiling takes weeks. Database searches take additional weeks. Building comprehensive family trees requires access to historical records spanning multiple generations. The complete process can extend across months, and Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 55 days. She is 84 years old. She has a documented cardiac condition requiring daily medication to maintain the regular function of her pacemaker. Without that medication, the risk of dangerous arrhythmia increases substantially. She left her home in pajamas, in the cold of a January night, without shoes, without a phone, without any of the resources her daily life depends on. Every medical professional consulted by journalists covering this case has offered the same assessment. The probability of survival decreases with each day that passes without treatment. This is why 20 investigators are working around the clock. This is why DNA is running through 2 labs simultaneously. This is why phones were seized and construction workers are being interviewed and a vacant property is being forensically examined. The pace of this investigation is not bureaucratic procedure. It is the acknowledgement that the one resource they cannot recover is time. Now let's talk about the 2 raids, because this is where the investigation crosses from analysis into action. Federal agents executed search warrants at 2 separate locations in mid-February. One was a residence in Rio Rico, a community near the Arizona-Mexico border, where a man identified in reporting as Carlos was detained and had his phone seized. The other was a home approximately 2 miles from Nancy's residence in Tucson, where a second man was detained and his phone was also taken by investigators. Here is the detail that stopped investigators cold. One of the men whose home was searched had recently purchased a Range Rover. The vehicle was acquired for approximately $17,400, somewhere between 1 and 2 weeks before Nancy Guthrie was abducted. Think about that timing. 3 weeks of documented surveillance, 2 confirmed reconnaissance visits, and then, in the final 10 to 14 days before the operation, someone buys a vehicle, not a vehicle connected to their daily life, a separate acquisition through a private sale with limited paper trail, a vehicle that could be driven through a target's neighborhood without being recognized, a vehicle that could disappear back into ordinary use afterward or be disposed of without raising immediate questions. Former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell offered the most probable analytical explanation for what led agents to these specific individuals. She said, the most likely scenario is that their vehicles were identified on surveillance footage, plates or vehicle configurations captured by 1 or more of the 6 cameras or by traffic systems in the area that connected these individuals to the neighborhood during the critical time window. Neither man has been charged with any crime related to Nancy's disappearance. Neither has been publicly cleared. The search warrants remain sealed, but the FBI does not execute search warrants and seize phones without probable cause supported by evidence. Whatever is on those phones is now in the hands of federal digital forensics specialists. And a vehicle purchased 10 days before a kidnapping by someone whose car may have appeared on surveillance footage near the victim's home is not a detail that disappears from an active federal investigation. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffendafer, who has been providing analysis of this case, stated recently that the investigation is, in her words, red hot behind the scenes. She noted that the absence of public arrests does not mean the absence of progress. She described the investigative team as working through more leads than most cases produce in their entire lifespan. The work is happening. It is simply happening in places the public cannot yet see. Now let's go back to the beginning, not January 31st, the actual beginning, Because understanding this crime requires understanding the environment in which it was planned and the one question that ties everything together. The Catalina foothills is one of the most affluent residential areas in Tucson. Homes are large, well-maintained, situated on generous lots surrounded by Sonoran desert terrain. It is a neighborhood where property values are high and where strangers tend to be noticed. But it is also, paradoxically, a neighborhood where certain categories of strangers are completely invisible. Landscaping crews, pool maintenance workers, contractors, delivery drivers, real estate professionals. The neighborhood's affluence generates a constant low-level traffic of service workers that residents have learned to treat as background. And that invisibility is precisely what someone used against Nancy Guthrie. The question investigators keep returning to is not only how the surveillance was conducted, it is how Nancy was chosen in the first place. Random selection does not exist in crimes of this complexity. 3 weeks of reconnaissance, ransom notes containing specific interior knowledge of the victim's home, an operation executed with this level of coordination. None of this is the product of an arbitrary choice. Someone identified Nancy Guthrie as a target, and that decision had a reason behind it. The most visible reason is the connection to Savannah Guthrie. Savannah's face appears on screens across the country every weekday morning. She is among the most recognizable anchors in American television journalism. Her connection to a mother living alone in Tucson is not a secret. It has appeared in published profiles over the years. And in the calculus of a ransom operation, that visibility answers two fundamental questions simultaneously. Does the family have the financial capacity to meet a demand? And does the family have sufficient emotional motivation to actually pay? The connection to a national broadcast anchor makes both answers obvious to anyone willing to research it. Former federal investigators have noted that ransom kidnappings targeting family members of wealthy or high-profile individuals follow a pattern that international law enforcement agencies have studied extensively. These crimes occur with greater frequency in parts of Latin America and Central America, where the infrastructure surrounding ransom operations is more developed. But they do occur in the United States. And when they do, they share common characteristics: detailed target selection, extended surveillance periods, operationally sophisticated execution, structured ransom communication protocols. All of those characteristics are present in the Nancy Guthrie case. The proximity of Rio Rico, where one of the raids took place, to the Arizona-Mexico border, has not gone unnoticed by analysts following this investigation. Former FBI personnel with experience in cross-border organized crime have observed publicly that the operational sophistication of this abduction is consistent with criminal networks that have developed specific expertise in targeted abductions. This is not a charge. It is not a conclusion. It is an analytical observation. But it explains why the FBI's investigative reach in this case extends well beyond the state of Arizona. Now let's talk about the financial trail. Because someone spent money to take Nancy Guthrie, and money always leaves a mark. A ransom kidnapping is, from its very first moment, also a financial crime. The preparation requires expenditures, masks, gloves, transportation to and from Tucson, potentially lodging if participants traveled from elsewhere, the acquisition of communication devices designed to limit traceability, the Range Rover purchase documented in search warrant records, and eventually, the mechanism by which ransom payment was to be received. Cash transactions leave point-of-sale surveillance records. Card purchases leave direct digital trails. Cryptocurrency transactions, commonly misunderstood as anonymous, are recorded on publicly verifiable blockchains that financial investigators have become increasingly skilled at tracing. Vehicle acquisitions leave title transfer documents. Financial analysis is running in parallel with every other thread in this investigation, working backward from known expenditures and forward from identified accounts, looking for the connections that tie a financial profile to the surveillance behavior already documented on camera. Now let's talk about the phones. Because the two devices seized during the February raids may contain more information than any single piece of physical evidence in this case. A modern smartphone is a portable archive of its owner's movements and communications across the entire period it was in use. GPS location data, call logs, text messages, encrypted communications, browser histories, app data, and critically, for this investigation, location records that can answer the one question that matters most. Was this phone in the Catalina foothills on January 11th, on January 24th, on January 31st? The FBI's Cellular Analysis Survey team specializes in extracting exactly this kind of data from seized devices and from cellular network records. If a phone from either seized device places its owner in Nancy's neighborhood during the documented reconnaissance dates, that is not circumstantial evidence. That is direct evidence of presence. Combined with the vehicle data from the 6 cameras, combined with the financial records being traced, Combined with the DNA being processed in two separate laboratories, a picture emerges that is very difficult to escape. And that DNA, if the samples collected from Nancy's home produce a viable genetic profile, and if that profile is uploaded to consumer genealogical databases where millions of people have voluntarily submitted DNA for ancestry research, the system will search for partial matches. Relatives who share genetic segments with the unknown contributor, third cousins, fourth cousins, people who never had any involvement in a crime but whose ancestry tests are now part of a database that investigators can access. When those matches appear, forensic genealogists build family trees. They work forward through generations. They narrow the field until the list of candidates becomes small enough for surveillance and direct comparison to take over. The methodology identified a perpetrator in California who had evaded detection for 4 decades. It works because people take ancestry tests without ever thinking about what their DNA reveals about the rest of their family. If the suspect's relatives are in those databases, and statistically the probability increases with every year more people submit samples, the identity of whoever entered Nancy's home is already waiting to be found. Which brings us back to the only variable in this entire investigation that cannot be recovered. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 55 days. She is 84 years old. She has a documented cardiac condition. She left her home in January, in pajamas, without shoes, without her phone, without her medication. Every medical professional consulted about her prognosis says the same thing. The probability of survival decreases with each day that passes without care. This is why the FBI has dedicated every resource available to this case. This is why they pulled footage from cameras the suspect never knew existed. This is why DNA is running through 2 laboratories. This is why phones were seized. This is why construction workers are being interviewed and financial records are being traced, and a vacant property near Nancy's home is being examined for physical evidence. The pace of this investigation is not process. It is urgency. Because the one thing that cannot be bought, cannot be recovered, and cannot be rebuilt once it is gone is time. And Nancy Guthrie is running out of it. The suspect who stood on that porch for 4 seconds made a decision they believed would protect them. They reached up and tore a camera off a wall. They thought that single act would close the most dangerous window of exposure against them. What it actually did was open every other window at once. It told the FBI this person understood surveillance technology. It told them the crime had been thought through. It told them to stop looking only at the night of January 31st and start looking at the 3 weeks before it, at the footage that documented the preparation, at the vehicle captured 6 times by a traffic camera 3 blocks away, at the figure walking the sidewalk on a neighbor's Ring doorbell, at the rear doors left propped open and the fence camera that may have watched them being opened. 4 seconds of footage, 1 camera destroyed, 5 others the suspect never saw, and every single frame is now in federal hands. The reward standing for information leading to Nancy Guthrie's safe return is $1.1 million. $1 million from the family, $100,000 from the FBI. If you live in the Catalina foothills area and have surveillance cameras on your property, please review your recordings for January 11th, January 24th, and January 31st. If you see anything that does not belong, any vehicle, any figure, any movement at an unusual hour, contact the FBI immediately. The tip line is available 24 hours a day. Someone knows something, someone saw something, and 6 cameras captured far more than the person who destroyed one of them ever imagined. This is not just an investigation. It is a family without their mother, a community without answers, and a trail of evidence that has not gone cold and will not go cold until there is an arrest and Nancy Guthrie is found. This is not just a case. It is a real life, a real family, and a search for truth that has not stopped for a single hour of the 55 days she has been gone. The cameras were watching the whole time, and the suspect never knew just how much they revealed.